this is Sarah. You know what? I'm not going to read all of this because you can read it for yourself. And I think we probably all know who Sarah Armstrong-Smith is these days, where she comes from, what she does, the kind of things she gets involved with. Phenomenal privilege for me and the ISFG to have her along today. We're very, very grateful. So really, without further ado, I'm going to see if I can just drive this thing across to your presentation. Over to you.
That's cool. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, good afternoon. It's nearly evening, isn't it? So, yeah, I'm really delighted to be with you. So the presentation I'm going to give today is actually kind of a presentation that I was asked to do by the National Cybersecurity Centre last year to celebrate the alumni, the 5-year alumni of their Cyber First programme. So the Cyber First programme is actually a bursary that's provided by the National Cybersecurity Centre to encourage young people who are in university to go and do cybersecurity. So originally it had to be, to get a bursary, you had to be doing a cybersecurity degree. And then they changed it because they quite rightly said, we need to have as many people as possible coming into cybersecurity. So they kind of opened it up and said, okay, you can have any degree, but to have a bursary, you have to be going into cybersecurity. And so obviously COVID happened and they weren't able to kind of get everybody together, and I think it was remote. And so they were really keen when they did the 5-year anniversary to have it in person, have it in Manchester. And my task, in essence, was to get young people excited about the art of the possible. And so, you know, we always look at cybersecurity as a bad place, bad things happen. But I get really excited about technology. And as I kind of been talking about, I've been in technology for over about 20 years. And I think the possibilities and, you know, what the future hold is so exciting. But obviously we're here to talk about cybersecurity. But I think before we look to the future, we really need to look backwards and think about where we've come from. So we've been on this journey for over 250 years, particularly when we think about the first industrial revolution, right back in the 1700s, when we changed manufacturing from being a very manual, horrible industry, very hard working, and steam came along and kind of changed everything. And then in the 1870s, we then had electricity came along, and that really opened everything up. So we had rail networks, we had road networks, and it really changed the emphasis of industry. Now, unfortunately, we then had 2 world wars. So kind of in that intervening period between 1914 and 1945, all kind of industry was focused on military and war efforts, and not a lot have happened. But after the Second World War, it's really, we need to build, and we need to build really quickly. This is kind of the dawn of electronics and IT. And then if you kind of get to 2016, you can kind of argue the toss on this, but the World Economic Forum basically said we're now in a 4th industrial revolution, which is really that kind of interplay between the physical, the digital, and the biological world. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but I think what's really important to think about is the gap in between each one of those revolutions. And some people even argue we're already headlong into the 5th industrial revolution, which is really earmarked by that AI superintelligence and kind of where we're going next. Now you can argue, is that just an extension of the 4th? Is that a new industrial revolution? I don't really know. But I'm going to really pick up from the start of the century, and I'm not going to kind of go through all of these one by one. And I'm there for you to kind of read. But I think by us looking at the dawn of the new century, what happened, how much technology really has changed, but also how many new companies have appeared, and also how many companies we've lost along the way. Now, my career actually really kick-started in 1999. I had a really bad habit of volunteering for things. I really didn't know what I was volunteering for. So at the time, I was working for a water utility company, And they said, we need lots of people to come and work on this new program. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. And that just happened to be the Millennium Bug. Now, for me in particular, that kind of kick-started my career in business continuity, because I'm one of the really annoying people that have to ask why 100 times. Why, but why, but why? So my role really at the time was to look at all the tests that had to be done on the stroke of midnight. I said, yeah, but what if the systems don't come back up and running? What if we can't get clean running water to people? And it's kind of what if, what if, what if? And I didn't know that business continuity was a subject. To me, it just felt like common sense. So when someone actually said you could have a career in this, I was just like, this is it, this is me. And that's kind of what kick-started everything. But also there was a number of really significant events that happened since the dawn of the century, not just from a technology perspective, but seismic events that really have altered a lot of the things that we kind of see. And I would sort of say 2001 and 9/11 really changed a huge amount. And at the time, I'd moved from being from a water utility company, I'd moved into a financial services company. And my job really moved from business continuity and disaster recovery. My job at the time was looking at how do I recover IT systems, and it was all about backup tapes. And it wasn't unusual for us to be thinking about it takes 75 hours to restore systems. 9/11 came along and said, this is too slow. We have to fasten up. And all of a sudden it came about replication. We need to speed things up as quickly as possible. Now, a couple of other things that really happened in those kind of 4 or 5 years is we started to see a huge increase in social media. So we've seen Wikipedia, MySpace, Facebook, all of those things that kind of happened. So you even have LinkedIn. Our social media was taking off at a huge pace. We kind of then look at what happened next. So in 2005, my very, very first day on the job, at EY happened to coincide with the 7/7 London bombings. And at that time, my career was all very much about business continuity, disaster recovery, and all of a sudden, everybody wanted to have crisis management. They wanted, so we have these huge terrorist attacks right on our doorstep. And again, it kind of changed the emphasis of what we were focusing on and where we were really going, where's our trajectory. And again, if we kind of think about what are the things that happened, so we had YouTube, we had Twitter, and even when we think about the cloud, that 2006, Amazon launched AWS, the first big public cloud platform. And then we had Google coming online 2 years later, where we sort of had that internet boom, e-commerce, all of those things. But we also had the financial crash, and for a little while, things slowed down. So we really kind of had to refocus about what we were doing. So we then come to 2010 to 2014, and we started to even see like Microsoft gets in the game and develops Azure. So now we have 3 public cloud platforms within that short space of time. But the interesting thing is we also started to see that biological world and digital world starting to collide together, as we were talking about. So we had synthetic organs, we had synthetic skin. We've also seen skeletons being made out of titanium, all of these kind of things coming together. But also we started to sort of see gaming taking off in a huge way. So technology really sort of focusing in to how gaming has changed in social media. So we saw the Xbox was launched. We had PS4 launched as well in 2013. But all of a sudden, it's not about the smart technologies. We actually wanted to get that smart technology smaller and smaller, more powerful, right into literally the palm of our hands. So let me go again, 2015 to 19, and we started to sort of see really how things are opening up. And it's quite interesting that even in 2015, OpenAI, and I will come back to that, was founded, and it was founded by a number of people who all came together. Some rich people in their own right, Elon Musk, and a few others, and they all committed $1 billion of their money or corporate money into OpenAI. And we'll just kind of see where that's kind of going. So 2016, we started to see supercomputers being built. But we also started to see implants coming along. Again, that kind of fusion of the physical, digital really coming together. We started and then 2018, we had the Cambridge Analytica scandal. It really kind of brought to the forefront some of the problems that we've just been talking about earlier with data protection, privacy, security, all kind of coming to the forefront of all of these things. So if we bring it back into the last couple of years, I even think about 2020 was when I joined Microsoft, and I joined just as the UK went into lockdown. Now, I don't think any of us were really expecting the global pandemic was going to last for nearly 3 years. But so much change has happened even in that short period of time. In 2020, we had a huge acceleration to the cloud at a level we have never seen before. To kind of put that into perspective, so in Microsoft Azure, we had 8 times burst capacity as a result of that mass acceleration. A lot of that came from Teams, believe it or not. So a lot of people suddenly needed collaboration tools, Teams, Zoom, WebEx, all of those things. And we went from 17 million active users to 250 million active users, processing about 2 billion minutes a day. And that was right at the kind of peak. The other thing that kind of happened in 2020, thinking really Microsoft got in on the OpenAI Act and also said to AI, OpenAI, we will build you a supercomputer. We've never actually built a supercomputer before, but we have one of the biggest cloud platforms in the world. So what we'll do is we'll build a supercomputer to run on the cloud. And really, when you kind of see, okay, so that was 2020, but also in 2020, we also saw one of the biggest cyber attacks that we've ever seen, and that was SolarWinds. And we genuinely believe one of the most sophisticated cyber attacks we've ever seen. And we kind of see bigger and bigger cyber attacks, and we've seen the attackers' willingness to come out of the shadows. So not just focusing on disruption, but destruction as well. So if we get to 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, this is a real example of a hybrid war where they're utilizing cyber attacks in relation to kinetic attacks as well. And what we've seen, particularly from Russia, even in the last year, is again their willingness to use destructive and wipe up malware into new environments, new ways of working. So their willingness to completely destroy environments. And that's something that we really have to be mindful of going forward. 2022 also became very interesting at the end of 2022. So when we think about social media, we think about some of those applications. So TikTok, before ChatGPT came along, was the most downloaded application of 2022. And it also surpassed over 2 billion users. Now, the other interesting thing is that actually goes to the top 5 downloads of 2022 is video editing software, which was specifically built to edit videos for TikTok. So that just kind of shows you a sign of the times. But then November 2022, everything changed. ChatGPT came along as a result of all that research in OpenAI, and it became the quickest launched application to reach 1 million users within 5 days. So 2023 came along. So not only did we ChatGPT 3, we went to ChatGPT 4 very, very quickly. And that amassed 100 million users inside 3 months, which makes it the fastest growing web platform ever. And generative AI is kind of top news right now. And the interesting thing, again, even if you think of in the last couple of weeks, we've had 1 factor of people saying we need to slow down. We need to stop what we're doing with regards to the effort that we're putting into AI, because we don't understand the risks and we don't understand what's going on. Now, just yesterday, Microsoft president actually said, no, we don't need to slow down. We need to fasten up. So in the next 6 months, if you think anyone's going to stop investing in AI, even if you tell them to, they're not going to, because there's so many companies actively investing in it. What we need is actually the regulators to start catching up with us, rather than, as we were talking, that massive lag that we have. The technology is already out, it's already in the wild. So actually in these next 6 months, so much is going to change, but we've got to get nations, we've got to get people involved and embedded and understand those implications. So in essence, we're kind of fighting this changing war, as we sort of said, that fusion between the physical, the digital and the biological worlds are kind of coming closer and closer together. Now, I'm also involved in a program that's being run by the UK Ministry of Defence, and it's their Futures program. Every 5 years, they try and predict, well, not necessarily predict, but think about how the world is going to change. And they're really being tasked to think about what does the world look like in 2055. Now, you're probably thinking, I can't even think about what it's going to look like in the next 5 years, let alone 30 years. But the reason why they've been tasked to do this, if you think about from a military perspective, if I have to invest in the next warship, the next Trident, whatever these things are going to look like, I have to kind of work backwards, thinking about what's the world going to look like, because I have to design all of these things, I have to get it into production, I have to think about the technology. And so it's really incumbent on them to understand how things are going to change. And there's going to be massive seismic events that are going to happen in that intervening period, that probably not even on our radar. That's just going to shift everything. And that's also against our mindset that still infers that the US, China, Russia, even the UK are going to be the most dominant superpower. So what if the whole thing changes? And I think what's really centered to everything that they're looking at is the impact of cyberspace. And there's no getting away from it. Cyber is absolutely critical. It's embedded into everything. And I think there's that realization as well. Even when we look back in the last 3 years, I think we can all kind of say, as a result of the global pandemic, we've all experienced this kind of level of resilience. And what does it mean to be resilient from a personal perspective, but also from a corporate perspective? And kind of got this kind of perception that we need to go from resilience to perseverance, that this is not going to slow down. It's going to get faster and faster and faster, at a level that we probably can't keep pace with. And part of that is really understanding and harnessing the power of technology and how technology is going to solve some of our biggest problems of humanity. So as much as we talk about some of these kind of things that are going on, really having embedded into science, medicine, all of these things, how are we actually going to solve, if we can solve, climate change? How do we actually overcome things like Alzheimer's? How do we overcome some of these big diseases and famine and all of these things that actually impact humanity as a whole? And I think there's some real things at forces at change that we have to kind of think about in different industries. And I'll only pick on a few of those industries, but even in the automotive industry, if you've been seen in the last couple of years, the amount of investment that's going into autonomous vehicles, what does it truly mean to have an autonomous vehicle? At what point do we feel safe enough to trust a machine to drive on our behalf without any human input? Now, it's estimated that if we took the human out of the equation in particular, and we did rely on the machine and all the machine's telemetry data and the safety that we put into play, it could save nearly 600,000 lives a year. I'm not sure we're at that point yet where we're going to be able to safely say at what point we will have autonomous vehicles, but it is certainly one of the big drivers behind us. The second was one of the things I talked about is regards to the drivers behind health. And it's estimated by 2050, over 22% of the population will be over 60 years old. And it's also estimated that half of the people born today will live to over 100. Now, if you think about the drain of those billions of people on the planet, of all of those people living to over 100, how are we going to look for them? How are we going to provide for them? So healthcare in particular, when we think about science, medicine, how we're going to evolve, becomes really, really critical. But the data itself that's being generated for that also causes a massive issue. And it's estimated it's currently 6.2 billion a year that it's costing the medical industry with regard to data breaches and issues of security, privacy, and compliance, and manufacturing in particular. The amount of investment that's required in smart technologies, thinking about the production lines of the future and the cost involved of keeping those production lines going, given the demand that's coming from all of those billions of people. And again, when we think about the impact of cybersecurity in all of that combined, means that the cybersecurity industry alone for manufacturing is estimated to go to over $1 trillion of spend. So where are we? What does that really mean? Well, I think what we can look back on our last 20 years, if we've become more and more digitally connected, and we're moving from not just having connected things, but connected everything. And this is kind of where the future really lies. If anything and everything becomes connected, what is the impact of that? So we're really evolving into a new world of computing and computing power. And some of those we've already touched on with regards to artificial intelligence, mixed reality, and quantum as well. So let's start with AI in particular. Now, AI as a concept is nothing new. When we were talking about that kind of third industrial revolution with computers, and it really kind of, people were really thinking, even in the 1950s, what if we could have a computer that eventually would have the same intelligence as a human? And it kind of dawned on them a little bit that actually that's going to be incredibly hard and difficult. So it's a great concept to think about. We don't have the computers, we don't have the power, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the know-how. Every kind of stopped, slowed down, kind of really picked up again in earnest in the last sort of 10, 15 years, where we started thinking from looking at machine learning and deep learning. The power of the cloud really enabled us to start thinking about things in different ways. And again, how we could utilize AI for good in that science and technology, how it's going to transform people. And even now, right now, we're really kind of in that deep learning mode where we have multimodal models, which is a bit of a mouthful, but in essence, it's that ability to take the written language and turn it into images or images into tags. Now, with that in mind, I have actually included some generative AI images in this presentation, which I did probably about two days ago. And I want to know if you actually tell the difference. Some of them you might be, some of them not. To kind of answer Gareth's a really great point that he made before, is as much as we're talking about artificial intelligence, what we're really talking about is machine learning. Now, when you look about true AI, it's that ability to actually mimic the human in every which way possible with regards to not just how we think, how we act, the reasoning, the emotions, all of those things, the ability to perceive its environment and understand its environment. And arguably, we are actually quite a way off that at the moment. And really where we are is that in that machine learning mode, where there's huge amounts of data, we're running models across that data, and we're really trying to drive as many insights from that data as possible. When we think about that utopia, that kind of the AI, if you like, but it's a real realization that the human brain is still an enigma from a science and medical perspective. So there's not a computer on the planet, even if I was to daisy chain all the Microsoft, Google, Amazon cloud platforms together that can do what one brain can do. And that's kind of what a lot of scientists, that's kind of what technologists are really kind of focusing on.
So the difference is the huge amount of computational power and the huge amount of investment that's been made into this kind of environment. But then the real question is, as we sort of said, as computers behave more like humans, what is the real impact of all of these things? And that's the kind of dilemma that we kind of in right now. Do we really understand? Are we really prepared for the consequences? This is kind of where I got to, is kind of like, that fight back on automation. And when we've come from all of those different industrial revolutions. So you can imagine people, how scared they were, you know, way back when they were working in these factories. It was very much manual labor. When you kind of have steam engines and you have electricity, the fear factor of how they're going to lose their jobs. But it's not about losing the jobs, your jobs change. So that's the difference. There's all of the technology that we're talking about. It's not trying to remove the human, it's trying to help the human ultimately. This is quite interesting. So this is a book from 1956, which then talks about automation, friend or foe. And even way back then, you kind of had all this this fear factor that's kind of come out of nowhere, the killer robots, Terminator, all of the things, the bad things that could happen. And I'm not saying bad things can't happen, but it's really focusing on kind of some of the things. And these are just some of the scaremongering that happens from the media every day. You know, robots are going to take over the world. You know, this is the end of humanity. You know, all of these kind of things that we see. And kind of to your point, how do we get people excited? How do we get people on the journey if they live in perpetual fear all the time? And so it is incumbent, because we don't have regulations. And so is it just going to be a race to the finish line, or are we as a community kind of going to step in and have that word and be right front and center to these conversations? And this is where the real issue comes about ethics. And it's looking at Microsoft in particular, heavily invested in AI, machine learning. If you kind of look at the three major shifts that have happened, even in Microsoft's history, I would sort of say the first one was when Bill Gates actually started the company in 1975. His vision was to have a PC in every home. I think that's been surpassed multiple times over. I think the second big fundamental change came with the cloud. And this is the third. So the amount of investment, time and effort that's going into AI and understanding AI. So we have researchers as well that are heavily invested in understanding the ethics. And we have also developed the responsible AI practice. And we have various standards that we get out there as well. And so it's really about, really getting deep into some of those things and so understanding the ethical implications, and having codes of conduct and practices that doesn't wait until the regulation kind of comes along and tries to stop us from doing things, because it's already there, it's already in the wild. That technology is already being utilized. So we've got to stop looking at things after the fact and get more and more involved in these conversations. So when we are talking to the business, and the business wants to think about all this technology, making sure they do understand the ethical implications and they do understand security. So the next area that I was going to talk about is kind of the fourth wave of computing. Again, if I pick up from the third industrial revolution, where we're talking about the 1970s, big, huge mainframes. Then we went to personal computers, was almost in every home. Then we've had smartphones, smart devices. And where we're really moving to is this kind of mixed reality. And at the moment, we have two distinct worlds. We have our physical world, we have our digital world. Kind of mixed reality is really kind of bringing those two together. And this is where we kind of get the term, the metaverse, which is that convergence. But even the metaverse as a term is nothing new. That was first termed in 1992 in a science fiction film called Snow Crash. And it was, again, really imagining this virtual world, what it would look like, how we would live in it. And again, I want to kind of look at some misconceptions of the metaverse and what it is. It's not one thing, that's actually several different elements to it. And so we have kind of three different kind of core areas that we might kind of consider. So we have the kind of the consumer metaverse, if you like, which is the fantasy world of imagine computing and gaming and how gaming has changed. So a lot of the technology that's in gaming is to make it look as real as possible. So how much time and effort has gone into how the wind would move someone's hair, the skin tone, how the light shines on someone. So all of that has a focus into that consumer metaverse and that social interaction. This is really where Facebook is really trying to play into. The bit in the middle is the enterprise metaverse. And it's really thinking about hybrid working, collaboration. So how do you have the same experience, whether you're at home, you're in the office, or sat on the beach? So irrespective of where you are, who you are, How do you make sure that you kind of have those things? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have the industrial metaverse, which is really kind of taking that industrial revolution to the next level. It's investing in companies. So first of all, how do you even interact in the metaverse? We might already kind of thinking about the virtual reality when you're fully absorbed in. It's kind of the bit in the middle. It's that full headset. And at the moment, being really absorbed into that virtual world causes a lot of problems for our brain because we get very disorientated, very dizzy, because what our brain thinks we're seeing, what our bodies are experiencing is completely different. And so the other part then is actually being in the physical world with holographic images being portrayed over the top. So it's kind of like a halfway house, if you like. And that's really that kind of image on the end. And then you still have your traditional way of getting access to the digital world. So let's look at the Facebook world, first of all. I'm going to blame that scary person for why my presentation failed halfway through. But in his world, and this kind of investment at Meta, very interesting again why they changed their name. But this is kind of where Meta is looking at. So that really that social media, that experience, the fantasy world, how we game, how we collaborate with each other. But the real challenge then is that how do you actually get in that virtual world? People don't want just to have an avatar that looks vaguely like them, that has the same color hair, skin color. What they really, really want is an avatar that is them. So it's a full 3D render. So however I collaborate in the metaverse, I want it to be me. But I don't really want it to be me because I really quite like it to be a slightly younger, thinner, taller version of myself. And this is the kind of challenge that we already have in that kind of virtual gaming world, is we don't really know who we're talking to. So how could actually be a grown adult pretending to be a child and vice versa? And we already know some of the issues of child exploitation when we kind of have that right now. And so where are we kind of at the moment? Well, there's a huge investment into this kind of virtual world. And we're already seeing companies in looking at how they actually build and buy real estate in this virtual world. And the thing is, how do you actually buy things in this virtual world? Is it like a game? Do I get points? Do I use my own credit card and exchange that for virtual money? And therein lies the problem. Is this virtual world a safe place for us to be in? Not if we're standing some of the issues I've already talked about with regards to, is this really you? Who am I liaising with and what are they doing? Privacy becomes a real concern with that data, the oversharing of information. And it's estimated every generation is actually giving away more and more of their privacy, their data. And so will privacy even be a thing going forward? Because we give so much of our information away, and we give that information away for free with social platforms. And how much of that data is being used for profiling, is being used for training, is being used for machine learning. And if we're living in this virtual world, how do we actually communicate and collaborate people within the real world? And this is already a problem with the amount of people who are immersed into gaming, immersed into social platforms. When they kind of come out and go into the real and meet people for the first time, very awkward. They don't really know how to have these relationships. So are we going to make it worse? Are we going to make it better? And it comes down to accessibility with all this technology. It kind of comes to the haves and the haves not. So the more money you have, the more ability do you have to take advantage of some of this technology. If you're poor, if you don't have the means, you don't have the resources, the divide between those people get bigger and bigger. And so we already have a massive divide with regards to the accessibility of technology and services available to different people. So that becomes an issue. From a security perspective, we already know the principle of identity. Identity is core to everything, as a person, as a device. Now, if you have to authenticate with a full 3D version of yourself, and what is the risk if that 3D render is compromised in some way? How do you protect that? And how do you actually going to authenticate yourself as being the actual real person behind that? And obviously we have security. Just to put this into perspective, how's the metaverse look working out for cows? Well, so this particular farmer, he's got a full virtual reality headset on some cows, and from the cow's perspective, it thinks it's in a lush green pasture, eating all the lovely grass. It's so happy, and the reality is actually in a barn, just eating hay or straw. But the actual thing, because the cow thought it was in this lovely environment, the milk yield went up. So you can imagine, if I can manipulate a cow, imagine what I could do to a human when they're fully immersed into this. Imagine what I can get that human to do. And we already know, well, we can manipulate people to do a lot of things in cybersecurity through social engineering, phishing, doing all of these things. So that's the kind of the virtual bit. I want to go to the industrial bit, which is it's really kind of thinking of the physical and digital coming together. And you may have already heard the term digital twins, which is really kind of taking a complete replica of this building, if you like, and putting it into the digital world. And the theory behind it is that if I have a digital copy of the physical building, it enables me to model, I can manage, I can put IoT sensors everywhere, I could try different parameters, because doing that, trying to take a production line down in a real physical world, as we know, is very, very expensive. We're talking millions of pounds a minute, potentially. Hence why so many production lines are running out of support software and technology, and we have multiple security risks, because the balance between security and risk isn't there. Therefore, if I have a digital copy, I can kind of play around with it to my heart's content. But if I can do it, so can an attacker. And I think that's the reality, is actually brings in a new wave of what can an attacker do with this information. But I want to kind of think about some of the positives as well. So there's no doubt, when we're thinking about how we train people, how we get people excited about technology, how we immerse them. And if I have to make a critical change, or I'm in a major incident, I want to try different parameters, this is a really safe way to do it. And I can kind of try different things, see how it works before I put that into a live environment. And collaborating in this kind of world between the physical and the biological, and the kind of mixed reality, if you like, opens up so many possibilities. And we have so many opportunities about how we use the data, how we drive insights from that data as well. Now, these little dots can mean different things. It could be, how are those rooms in that building being utilized? How's the power being utilized? Where's it warm? Where's it cold? But also from an attacker's perspective, I can also look at exactly where I can get access into that building without nobody noticing. So where are the back doors? Where are the cameras? Where are all the things? And so you could kind of see that you have to see the balance between tech for good and tech for bad. Now, if I can do that in a single building, imagine what I could do to an entire city. Now, Seoul itself has basically in their 2030 plan, they said that they want to be the first city in the metaverse in its entirety. Now, the reason why they have said this is because Seoul is one of those mega cities, highly populated, and it's causing them a lot of problems when it comes to safety, making sure there's enough resources for all of those people. And again, they're really trying to emulate, how can I look at the safety? How can I look at all of those things? But when you think about all of the city's resources available to you digitally, what you could do with that? What if I change all of the traffic lights to green all at once? What if I actually turned all the street lights off all at once? Imagine if I could imagine the damage and imagine the impact of that. So as much as we want to embrace this technology, we also have to kind of consider the risk. Now, we talked a little bit about quantum, and we're still in the early days of really understanding quantum. But I found what really interesting a couple of weeks ago. There was a technology and innovation dinner hosted by the Lord Mayor in London. And one of the things that they said, from a science and tech perspective, the UK, the USA and China are the biggest superpowers when it comes to the amount of investment that's being made in science and technology. Biggest area of focus that they're looking for, AI, quantum and data. Those three things are going to be heavily invested in by the UK government. They are going to encourage as many international students, coders, security people, engineers as possible to come to the UK so that the UK becomes the pinnacle of these things. Now the challenge is, I think as someone said before, when you actually combine AI, when you combine the cloud, when you combine quantum together, we don't understand what happens next. It changes the law of physics in some way. So we're kind of entering the abyss and we don't really know, don't really understand where we're going. That's the kind of reality, is what does the future look like? We really don't know until a lot of these technologies come together and they kind of fuse together. Now, I just kind of want to round out by what the analysts are saying. So we kind of know where we are right now. But every year you have different analysts, Gartner, Forrester, various different people, and they try and predict what's the next year, the year after going to look like. And some of these might seem a little bit outlandish, but I look at it and go, there's a little bit of reality kind of kicking in here. And so this is kind of what they were saying. So this is what they were saying last year. With regards to the amount of companies that are going to start leveraging virtual reality in some way to onboard people. They were basically sort of saying the amount of supply chains that were going to be utilizing AI through automation. Now there's a lot of investment with regards to like Alzheimer's and different technology, different sciences, with regards to how this technology is actually going to be used for good. With regards to how you could utilize it. And I think the interesting thing, even last year, before we've had ChatGPT, they were sort of saying the market for responsible AI solutions will double. But the botnet is quite interesting. The amount of connected services that we have today is growing exponentially. Now, again, if I put that into perspective, every single day, Microsoft processes over 100 trillion telemetry signals, which is coming from everything that Microsoft is connected to. That number is rising at such a rate, and that all comes down to that level of connectivity. Given the amount of data that actually yields, is approximately 460 petabytes of data every day. That is more data than the entirety of NASA since space exploration started in the 50s, 60s, whenever it was. That's just per day. So it kind of gives you a feel for the amount of data that is being generated and the opportunity that generates as well for attackers to how much damage they could do. So we go to next year. It's really then thinking about those sensors, as I was talking about, utilizing how they're going to utilize that more and more. Again, that kind of investment into autonomous vehicles, people really challenging how much they're willing to give up their rights. If they're going to get access to better insurance, better products, better services, do they waive some of those things away? How many more cities are going to be invested into the metaverse, these digital twins? And it's estimated that a cyber attack, and I genuinely believe it's a matter of time, to see a cyber attack in an industrial control system that causes a huge accident with multiple fatalities. And I think this is the sign of the times as we started with regards to the amount of technology, the amount of malware that's being created to cause destruction, not just disruption. The 2025, let's go again. 50% of cities will experience successful attack. And that's due to that proliferation of IoT and OT. And a lot of companies will start to rethink and be forced to redesign some of the decisions that they're making with some of those kind of algorithms, more oversight, more human responsibility that coming in. We've also got robotics is estimated to be a $67 billion sector. And even by 2025, it's estimated over half the world's data will live in the cloud. So we're going to look, let's go 5 years past that. So we'll start to see 6G, smart grid technologies, 2035, have 1 billion service robots, self-driving vehicles will dominate the road. And we'll also have robots dominating the battlefield. And I think that's actually true based on some of the conversations I've even had with the MOD, because they do not want to put humans on a battlefield. And so they're looking at how do I protect people? How do I make sure I don't have to put people on the front line? So we're already seeing drones, we're already seeing long range missiles, all of those things. And if I could put a robot directly on a battlefield rather than a person, I'm going to save lives. We go to 2050. So over half of the world's current jobs won't exist in any which way possible. And I think the interesting thing is when we kind of think about everything being connected, everything being available through the internet, how we actually plug ourselves in to that environment. And I think a few people have gone, oh, there's absolutely no way that I'm going to have these kind of things put into my brain or whatever. But I think this is kind of the around how far into the future will we go? We have humans with robotic integrations. So we kind of started that these things are already out there. So we can think about how we actually integrate. Maybe we want to have better eyesight, better hearing. We want to have something that actually goes around our heart to make us being able to breathe better, to experience things better, to do sport, to do all of these things. What if it's the other way around? At what point will we have robotic integration with human intelligence? Now, this is the kind of the real issue is at what point we have super intelligence. And this is where I really want to kind of end. And it really kind of comes from SETI, which is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So one of the things that they talk about is the kind of little green men that we see in Hollywood. It's not actually too far away from the truth, because what we're looking for is a level of super intelligence that surpasses human intelligence. And our trajectory is at some point the two will converge and then the AI will go past it. And so what does this kind of look like for us when we're kind of thinking about that level of intelligence in a way that we can't even comprehend? And one of the things they talked about was even, are we even looking for ourselves? So are we actually mapping out our own trajectory when we look at super intelligence, how we're going to utilize it, how that super intelligence is also going to be embedded into robotics and how it's going to change what we do. And I'm just going to kind of land you on this very fine last picture. So kind of what's our role, if you like. So I kind of think we can't stop some of these things from happening as much as we like. We look at past history, things are going to happen whether we like it or not. But I really think we have an opportunity to be man's best friend with regards to really having security, privacy, ethics, all of these things built by design and by default. So we're already in this kind of situation where it's shift left. So we don't have security as a bolt-on, a necessary evil. It's something we think about right from day one. So I'm going to kind of leave it there, kind of come back to questions. So yeah, thank you very much.
Food for thought a little bit. Yeah. We started off with mainframes in basements and bunkers back in the 70s, whenever it was, and where we've ended up in just a couple of hours. That's pretty spectacular, if you ask me. That's good progress. Have we got any questions for Sarah immediately, bearing in mind? So what I think we'll do is we'll just do a couple of questions in here, and then Wendy's going to scowl at me if she doesn't get the cake. So we'll go through and get some cake. But Sarah's going to be around to answer questions, sign books. The books will be next door as well. So we take a couple of questions in here just to get the ball rolling.
Just a quick comment on towards the end now. I was at a presentation last week, and the guy giving the presentation is a guy called Len No, who's got 10 tip implants in his hand. It's blogged on my LinkedIn page. And, the biohacker, he demonstrated actually how he could hold a phone and download the phone with it. But the one thing that struck me is as you were talking about the increase in compute power, etc., and so on, you didn't mention sustainability. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a huge area of investment for Microsoft. So I think it's that kind of realization that all of these things come from power, liquid power. So every data center we build, so at the moment we have about 220 data centers, and we probably have a couple coming online every couple of years as well. Each one of those is being built with renewable energy, so they're all sustainable. But we also have AI ops as well, so every component that goes into every computer that's running the data center is being mapped and profiled and modeled. And so the actual servers that we actually have are not off-the-shelf servers that you might just have in a traditional data center. Each one of those is being maximized to be able to run efficiency, so we can swap it out before it fails. But we're also running big projects. So one of the ones that we had was we had a self-contained little mini data center. Looks like a self-contained unit. And we sunk it off the coast of the North Sea. And it was really kind of looking at from two things, using the current of the ocean to power the data center, but also using the cold of this ocean to cool it. And so we have a little thing called Project Water Bear, which is the little tiny little water bears in essence, and they can survive in extremes. They can survive in extreme heat and extreme cold. They can even be completely frozen and be brought back to life, kind of brought back to life, not brought back to life like in that weird sense, but it kind of goes into a stasis, if you like. So we're looking at both extremes, and now there's a huge amount of investment, not just in terms of the energy, but then where you actually place the data centers as well, because at the moment a lot of the data centers are in metropolitan areas because of the high-speed networks and things like that. But we also have Azure Space, which is the actually utilizing space and satellites. And the idea is that you could then drop one of these self-contained units in the middle of nowhere. So because if you think about some of the third world countries that don't have infrastructure, they don't have water, they don't have these things, because it's so incredibly expensive to try and get any of that infrastructure and power and all those things. And so if I can just drop these little units down, I've got the connectivity that isn't getting able to get the satellite uplinks. I've got all the power, I've got all the things that I need. And even speaking to some big construction firms, and these are construction firms that build nuclear power stations as opposed to housing projects. And they said that the issue they have, the reason why you don't have these big engineering projects in some of these countries is because of the expense and because there's no infrastructure, there's no water, there's no electricity. So the minute you can actually drop these self-contained units in, I can have autonomous vehicles dropped in. That enables me to kind of lay the first groundworks, if you like, and then I can bring the humans in, because all the infrastructure I need for the humans, for the water, the waste and everything else is going to be there. So it's all of those things are being thought about. It's just then how do you take it to the next level? So in a roundabout way, when you bring connectivity, you bring energy, you bring all of these things to those countries, it lifts all those countries up. And it's kind of, it combines all of those things together.
And linking to the question that you asked, I think, and some of the points that you just made, I spotted this morning, I think it was just yesterday, the Department for Science and Innovation and Technology has just published the International Technology Strategy 23, and they got 4 key principles, one of which is responsible, which is all about sustainability. The other 2 that particularly caught my eye were security and resilience. So open, responsible, secure, resilient. Should we take one more question in here and then we can wrap up? I'm going to go to the back because you've had to turn it.
So kind of future world sounds really fun. I remember a film from the 90s called Demolition Man.
Yes.
When where half of the population is kind of sits under the world living like rats. What are we doing at the moment to prevent something like that happening?
I don't think you can, as we sort of said, the physical divide of the haves and have-nots, I think it will widen. And I think that's where we then have the regulation that comes in, because we already had that already. I think the financial sector were very, very concerned with the use of algorithms that basically sort of said, I only want to give good credit to good people, which meant all the people that didn't have good credit were forced to kind of go to these like ridiculous lending companies that were doing like 100% interest. And they said, and that was because of the way that the algorithms have been designed to kind of weed out the people and, you know, not to be fair. And so that's kind of then the regulation then came in and said, no, you can't do that. You kind of can't have this kind of black box algorithm that automatically just shifts out all of these people. And I think this is, and I think I come back into where we have the responsible AI practices. One of them is about fairness, it's about transparency, it's security, privacy, and it's accountability. As all of those things are built in. So as you build the technology, you understand the consequences and you're accountable for what comes next. And so some of that is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so sometimes the break comes naturally, it should come naturally as you kind of stop and rethink and recalibrate all of the things. And I think even when you think about the amount of issues that have been raised, let's say with ChatGPT-3, which is the one that was put out into the wild in essence, that's probably its biggest test case, was putting it out there to get real people testing it in a kind of live environment. And then the GPT-4 will have 5, will have all of these evolutions. But I think what's quite interesting, I find quite refreshing actually, if you go onto the OpenAI website, it actually lists all the problems that they're identified. So people have already said it kind of makes stuff up. You know, there's security things, people are putting in personal data. How are we overcoming a lot of these things? And they've actually listed it out, and they're actually listening. This is what we found. This is what we continue to find. This is what we're doing about it. And so I think it's in making sure that all of these things are there, but also all of, as you sort of said, you kind of have this. What I kind of presented something as being really cool. Like I said, the art of the possible, but you then have this a balancing act, because we can't stop some of it, but this is kind of our role as security and resilience professionals, to make sure that people are building it with their eyes wide open, and whatever you put out there, you're accountable for ultimately.
You have a word with Mr. Khan, who's putting in this stop on cameras everywhere.
Well, I think we are already the most watched country, most monitored country in the world. So those things are already there. It's just and that's what I was sort of saying.
That's causing the divide, is what I'm saying. So,
yeah, and that's where the privacy issue
right
comes.
car or the right facility, you can't come in the city, or you pay a huge sum if you.
Folks, I've just got 2 final points to make, but before I do, let me say thank you again, Sarah. 2 very, very quick final points then. First one is, today wouldn't have happened without all sorts of people being involved. These guys, first and foremost, for starting the ISSG 40 years ago. We celebrate that today. Thank you very much.